Hello and welcome to the Monday Show via the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove and joined by our Newcastle United editor Aaron Stokes. Coming up on today's show, we're going to talk about Alexander Isak's future at the club and what has to happen now. The chase for Johan Wissa and Newcastle United's defeat to Arsenal over in Singapore. Plus, we've got some questions sent in from you guys, which is always much appreciated. As always, the show is sponsored by Saily, the company you need for your esim, which will provide you with a solid connection for your mobile while abroad. In fact, it would be the perfect thing for those currently following the club in Asia. Affordable, secure, easy to use. Saily is the eSIM provider for you. Hit the link in the podcast description box for a discount on your plan. Support the podcast and stay connected. Aaron, I've had a week off. Wonderful time with the family. Did I miss much?
I was just about to say you've probably picked quite a good week to have off because it's been pretty doom and gloom, hasn't it?
It's been very chaotic, to say the least, hasn't it? Kept you
Yeah.
busy?
It has, yeah. I think we probably could have done with our podcast host being in the studio in the last couple of days. Because as you say, we've had quite a little bit to talk about.
Just a tad, and we'll cover most of it in this episode. I was watching from afar on the wonderful hills of County Durham. I had a nice holiday home up there and just watching everything kind of break last week. Literally break heart, I think is the way to describe it with Alexander Isak, which of course we'll talk about later in the show. But before we do that, we've got an unboxing to do live on the show. This arrives last week. And in the world of Newcastle United, where it is a bit doom and gloom, I mean, it is well taped up. This might not go as well as I planned. I've got some scissors. I think it is finally our trophy that we won last month for the best sport podcast at the Podcast Publisher Awards. Look at them sound effects for anyone listening. Are we going to get into this? I find it as tough as Newcastle are to sign some players getting into this. Let's have a little deeks in here, though. About trying to break anything.
There we go.
There's a card in there. What does that say? Oh, it is. Look at this, ladies and gents. Here it is. The second time we've won this wonderful award. There we go for the people watching live on YouTube and on Facebook. Come on, read it out. What does it say, Aaron?
And the card that they've sent in with it says the Publisher Podcast Awards 2025 Best Sport Podcast. Commercial success for this podcast, which works hard to create content that goes back into publishing formats. A phenomenal output given the size of the team. Congratulations to the winner, the Everything's Black and White podcast.
There we go. It finally arrived. It's been stuck in Manchester for a few weeks. And here it is. So we'll put that to the shelf. Thank you to everyone who tunes in, subscribes, listens, sends emails in. It's all much appreciated. And we couldn't do it without you guys. Right. We're going to talk about Alexander Isak. We're going to talk about James Trafford. We're going to talk about Aaron Ramsdale and the news that Newcastle United in from That's Just Broken by our Sky Sports. We'll talk about all that later in the show. But first, let's have a quick reflection on the defeat to Arsenal over in Singapore. 3-2 loss. I think really we need to start, Aaron, with the starting 11. And it is pre-season. It is all about the minutes. And you'll hear me say that a lot on this episode, ladies and gents. But a back four to begin with the Trippier, Lascelles, Byrne and Alex Murphy. Later, Matt Targett came off the bench. It's raised a few questions, predominantly on social media. Namely, and that is some of the progression of the squad. And look, we know PSR is a really big issue, but some have questioned whether Newcastle United in 2025, Champions League Newcastle United, should have a back four or even a squad that still includes some of those players that I mentioned there.
Look, I think it's a valid point. I can understand why some people are making it, but if I'm totally honest, I personally don't think the back four or the defensive options are anywhere near the forefront of my mind at the moment. And I suspect they're probably not at the forefront of Eddie Howe's mind. I understand the point. Obviously, Jamal Lascelles and Emil Kraft and some of these players have been in the club a long time. And, maybe another manager would have chosen to move them on, but there's no point going over why Eddie Howe wants these players are on the squad. Everyone knows the sort of value he sees in them. And look, it's pre-season. Okay, he's going to give runs out to the likes of Alex Murphy, who I think's done very well in the first two games. We know come the first game of the season at Aston Villa, it's probably not going to be a lot of these players.
And I agree. For what it's worth, I still think Lascelles has a huge part to play in this squad in the up-and-coming season. I think it's then a case of asking the question of who's really paying any money for the likes of Matt Targett or Kieran Trippier, and it's not a case that Newcastle can just cut them loose. More so on Matt Targett that you're not going to cut Kieran Trippier loose. And I get the points about other teams around Newcastle and the comparison of squads, but with a limited budget, it's hard really to see Newcastle going on a path where they get rid of all these players who we can't be honest and say probably aren't up to scratch where we want Newcastle United to be or expect them to be. But this is the hand they're dealt with. You've mentioned Alex Murphy there. Spent last season on loan at Bolton, making 13 appearances at home at centre-back as he is at left-back. Big summer for him. 4 more games this pre-season for him to really stake a claim. Unlucky with the own goal against Arsenal. I mean, some finish in the end. Very difficult to get in from that angle. But he's thought of very highly at Newcastle United. Own goal aside, how did he do against Arsenal, and what do you think the future holds for him?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, Alex Murphy. I thought of a pretty bad bunch at Celtic. He was one of the few standouts. He came on at half-time and looked quite good down the left, especially going forward. And then we saw glimpses of him yesterday, especially in the first half when he played against Bukayo Saka, where I thought it was a really interesting battle between the two. Very, very unfortunate with the own goal, but I think from what we've seen in the first 2 games of pre-season, it's very clear that Eddie Howe rates him, and Eddie Howe wants to give him a try, just as he did in the Premier League last season. Sorry, the season before. He wants to see if he's up to the standard. Now, if you've even glanced at social media after the defeat yesterday, you'll have seen that Matt Targett probably wasn't getting too much praise, and I think I wouldn't be totally surprised if Alex Murphy ends up being the backup to Lewis Hall this season.
I could see that happening, and me and Mark Crothers, a North East journalist, covered the academy in a special episode last week, and a lot of the focus was on the likes of Alex Murphy, and we spoke about him in depth. So go back and have a listen or watch that episode if you haven't. And Newcastle grabbed the opener through Anthony Elanga, worked down the right, Trippier to Sancho Nani, who pulled it back for Elanga in the middle, scuffs the shot, but ends up going into the back of the net. Important for him to get off the mark. Second outing for Newcastle United. How do you think he's done in his first 2 games?
Yeah, he's done okay. He very much did not mean that goal yesterday, but I don't think he'll care.
They all count.
It was very, very interesting yesterday actually seeing Elanga in the opening stages, because he played a lot more narrow than I suspected, despite obviously the fact he's playing out wide. Very, very fast, clearly, as we knew he was when he was signing. I think there's a lot to like the first 2 games, and you suspect he's only going to get better when he comes into this team. I suspect now is probably the time, 7.5 minutes into this podcast, to mention the fact that he may not be playing with Alexander Isak next season, which will be a huge blow to him, given that no doubt Isak, his Swedish companion, was one of the reasons that he joined. But look, I think he started really well. Again, you can't really judge off that Celtic defeat because Newcastle was so poor and got beat so heavily. But I actually thought when he came on, he was quite bright as well. Very, very good to see him get that goal yesterday.
Everyone's been very impressed with him in training. He's clearly working hard to make that impression. I'm really looking forward to seeing him get more minutes under the belt and to start competitively, I would think, against Aston Villa on the opening day of the season. And Mikel Merino got the scores level. Really poor goal for Newcastle United to concede. Bruno dispossessed in the middle of the park, looked to the referee like he thought it was a foul. It wasn't. Arsenal up the pitch, Arsenal go. Merino ends up putting the ball in the back of the net. When you see a goal like that conceded, Aaron, and it's all really of Newcastle United's making, do you just have to remind yourself that it is pre-season and this is what these games are for? It's to kind of get the energy in the legs and hopefully eradicate these early mistakes. And by the time you come out in the Premier League kicking off, the more switched on, the more focused, and we shouldn't be seeing that in a competitive game.
Yeah, look, let's be totally honest. Certainly from my point of view, anyway, I take very little notice about pre-season, about performances, it's a totally different kettle of fish. We know the players are coming back off, their summer breaks. I don't think you should be reading anything into these games, if I'm totally honest. Yes, it was. I think the only thing really to take from yesterday for me was, and you can tell clearly from my tone, my disdain for pre-season friendlies and how little I care for them. But I think the only thing really that mattered to me yesterday was that they showed a better performance than they did at Celtic. And I think they did do that massively. I thought they pressed really well in tricky conditions, humid conditions. And bearing in mind, Arsenal have already had a game out in Singapore. They've been there a week compared to Newcastle being there 2 days. I think that was the only thing you could really judge them on. Yes, obviously for the first goal, it was all Newcastle United's make, and Bruno loses the ball. He tries to win that foul, as he does so often. But yeah, look, it's the first game out in Asia. I'm not going to lose too much sleep over him losing the ball on the edge of his own box.
I agree with you. But that being said, Jacob Murphy comes off the bench and he scores a goal, left foot drive from distance. You feel like an important moment for him following the arrival of Elanga, because obviously it's them two competing for that spot, and everyone assumes that Elanga will be the first choice right winger. Murphy will be working his socks off in training, but really the only way he's going to stand a chance of keeping his spot on the right wing is by doing what he did against Arsenal. And yes, it's only pre-season friendly, but by performing well, scoring goals, and just maybe creating that little bit of doubt in Eddie Howe's mind that Elanga is the number one choice.
Well, it's worth going back 12 months ago because people will have forgotten this by now because of how contrasting their seasons were. But actually, going into the start of last season, it was very much Almiron ahead of Murphy in the pecking order, some would say. Now, Murphy had such a fantastic pre-season last year where he scored so many goals that he essentially made Eddie Howe's mind up for him. Now, I think he's going to have to go one better this summer and go even further to impress him. But I think it looks like he's relishing this competition with Elanga. I don't think he's going to be sitting there saying, well, that's me benched. You know, he's shown what he can do. He played well yesterday. He looked bright. He took the goal very well. It's hard for him, obviously, because you've got this shiny new signing who Newcastle paid a lot of money for, and who on paper is probably going to come in and replace him. But I think from what we've seen so far, his attitude looks very much spot on in terms of I'm going to try and win this spot back.
I think if there's one man you can count on having the right attitude, it will be Jacob Murphy. And then hopefully after really a year of no competition on that right wing, he, like you say, relishes this opportunity and having Elanga pushing him for that spot. And we have Martin Odegaard getting the winner from the penalty spot. Comes after Max Dowman being brought down by Joe Linton. The teenager just left Matt Targett for dead. Not to labour the point, Aaron, but it points to what we've just spoken about Alex Murphy and about Matt Targett. You know, Matt Targett did not look comfortable. I know you've just painted the picture of the conditions and the turnaround with the time and the flight and what have you, but you know, he cannot be back up to Lewis Hall, can he, for next season? And that presents, as you've mentioned, an opportunity for Alex Murphy really to stake his claim in the last 4 games of the pre-season. And come Aston Villa, you know, Lewis Hall might not be fit enough to even start. He could potentially be starting a left back.
Yeah, look, I think a lot of fans will agree, and it's a shame because he did so well when he came in. But I think Matt Targett's time at the club is probably done. I thought he looked quite tired yesterday. I think, you know, the injuries have maybe caught up with him a little bit. And yeah, look, I don't think he can go in this season with him being the number 2.
But not exactly putting himself in the shop window, is he, with performances?
No.
And again, it's hard. It's easy for us to say here, sitting here in nice temperatures. But I just struggle to see how Newcastle United are going to move him on unless they just take a loss on him.
I think they're going to have to take a loss. I don't think you're going to recoup anywhere near what you paid for him a couple of years ago, of around 15 million. But I think there will be suitors. I think there'll be suitors lower down the Premier League or in the Championship if Matt Targett wants to go there. That will take a punt on him if the wages are right.
Is there a chance, do you think, that Alex Murphy could start as Newcastle United's left back against Aston Villa at the start of the season? Or do you think if Lewis Hall isn't fit, we'll see what we saw last season with Livramento at left back and Trippier at right back?
It's hard without a crystal ball, but I think if I was Eddie, I think I'd go Tino left back and Trippier right back because of how well it worked. But I think Alex Murphy is definitely in and around Eddie Howe's thoughts with this season in mind. I think it's telling that a few of the youngsters have been left behind with the 21s. Some haven't been taken at all, the likes of Joe White, and they are going. Alex Murphy is very much there. He's played both games ahead of Matt Targett on both occasions. So I think he's very much in with a shout. He just needs a really good pre-season under his belt to really sort of stake that claim.
Just talk to us about some of those that have been left behind. I mean, Sanusi was probably the big one.
Yeah.
And obviously, you know, Anthony Munda's actually been included. And we mentioned, again, another name we mentioned on the podcast from Mark Withers. I was a little bit surprised to see him included ahead of others. And what did you make of the inclusion of the youngsters and those who have been omitted?
Yeah, it's interesting. So Sanusi was obviously the big one that we all thought we would see purely because of how much game time he got last summer in pre-season, both at home and abroad. Fans are obviously so excited to see more of him. He's been left behind. He was playing with the under-21s over the weekend. No room for Ben Parkinson, either at Celtic or at Newcastle, despite the fact he was obviously in and around the training of the first team when they came back to Benton. No Alfie Harrison as well. So, I mean, they are no Karan Kowal. They are stacking up these youngsters at the under-21 level. So, yeah, interesting to see Travis Hearns there. There's a real shot for him to become the 6th centre midfielder of the season behind Lewis Miley and Joe Willock. Anthony Munda, of course, in with a shout as well. Alex Murphy's in there and Sean Neve as well. So, you know, a good chance for these youngsters to stake their claim in the summer.
Some good experience to be had at the very least. You've seen enough positives, so have you, from the opening 2 defeats in pre-season for Newcastle United to build on?
Again, look, I really try to pay so little attention to these friendlies and trying to, you know, take anything from them. But I thought yesterday, I'll be totally honest, after watching them at Celtic, I was fearing the worst yesterday against a decent Arsenal side. But I thought it was a really entertaining game. I thought they matched Arsenal. I thought they pressed really well. I think Howe will be really, really buoyed by what he saw yesterday compared to 7 days earlier. 2 more games to get used to it. Then they're back home for 2 games in the Saga Cup. So yeah, early days, but I think you can take positives from yesterday.
I agree that the results matter little, but part of me also thinks that winning is a really important thing to start getting used to. You don't want to go into that game against Aston Villa having lost all your preseason games, do you? So maybe at this stage, but if we're talking in a few weeks' time, they're still yet to pick up a win in preseason, maybe your opinion may have changed. Right. Shall we get on
Let's
to
do it.
the main
We've
purpose
waited
of this
16
show?
minutes when we should have been talking about it from 16 seconds in. What everybody wants to know.
Mr. Alexander Isak. So much to talk about then. So many questions regarding the striker and his future. And like I said, I was watching from afar last week, just thinking about what I would say when I returned to this very studio. Now, from Isak's point of view, I don't begrudge him wanting a potential move to a club that stands a real chance of winning the biggest titles and, of course, getting a massive pay rise in the process. I don't mind that. I don't have an issue with that. My issue, and it's twofold, is one, the timing, and one, refusing to train. So on the timing, Aaron, Liverpool's interest in Isak has been there for at least the last 12 months. It's nothing new. And I'm slightly put out at the fact that Isak and his representatives have waited until the middle of July, 3-4 weeks before the Premier League season kicks off, to kick up a fuss and explore their options. For me, Isak last week didn't suddenly decide he wanted to go. I think that's months in the making. Something ever so little in the back of his mind is obviously grown, and now it's a big kind of blur and alarm. I want to go, but I don't think it's just suddenly he woke up last week and said, fancy going. So I just think the timing is all off. And he was absent as well for what would you say, 8-10 games of last season. Newcastle had to do it without him. I just don't understand why you would not go knock on Eddie Howe's door the day after that Everton game, last game of the season, and say, look, I've helped Newcastle win a cup. We've got the Champions League once again, but I want to leave. It would have stung, but it would allow Newcastle United to plan and get his replacement in a lot quicker. Now I think they're going to struggle. He probably would have been able to get a move. I just think the timing is all wrong. And it could have been that Isak was waiting to see what Newcastle would do in the transfer market. Yeah. And we have to be honest, it hasn't quite gone to plan. But for me, the timing is just all off.
The timing is obviously unfortunate because I think for me, and I do agree with your point, but for me, it's more the fact that, Newcastle are now going to go into the last 4 or 5 weeks of a transfer window, whether they've got 150 million to play with after Isak goes or not, trying to replace one of the best strikers in world football with that little time when you've already missed out on 6 or 7 really high-profile targets. It is a huge ask. Now, I put out something on Twitter on Wednesday or Thursday saying Newcastle have got 2 options. You either sell and you bank 150 million and you try somehow in the last month to get a deal in, or, and the option I would prefer, I think, going to my head, is you hope that he stays and you hope Eddie Howe can get him back, on track and refocus, because I just think, is trust in the right word? Trust in this Newcastle at the minute with no sporting director and an outgoing CEO after such a difficult summer to not only re-spend that money on Isak and sign a replacement, but also sign a backup for him and a centre-back and potentially a goalkeeper. You are asking for a lot. On the timing, I think it matters because if Isak had said, I want to go at the very start of the summer, you suspect Newcastle might have gone in for Victor Gyökeres, who is now at Arsenal. You suspect they probably would have went in for Hugo Ekitike, who is now at Liverpool. Or they would have made their move for Benjamin Sesko a lot earlier. Now, as I mentioned, they've got a month left and they need not 1, but potentially 2 strikers in.
Yeah, we've seen nothing really so far this summer, despite my hopefulness that we would do that. Newcastle will be able to move with pace. Eddie Howe's been, I think, quite diplomatic in his press conferences that we've seen him so far about the transfer window, but fans are beginning to get very, very worried. Some are getting very irate.
There's a frustration there with Howe, and I think he has been diplomatic, but I think you can tell he's not happy.
I mean, there's a frustration within Newcastle United, though, as well. And one of the questions have actually been sent in by one of our listeners. Let me just get to it now. We've got a host to put out to Aaron at the end of the show. But it was about Amanda Staveley, because we know a lot of people have gone on social media. And here we go. It's from Harry. And he says, does this summer prove that Newcastle United relied on Amanda Staveley for some direction? Since she left, it seems to have gone off-road slightly. And that's kind of an opinion of quite a few people that you read on social media, some prominent fan accounts as well. I don't necessarily agree. I think Newcastle United would have been in the same position whether Amanda Staveley was still in the position she was or not. You know, PSR is a massive, massive issue. They are buying or trying to buy in a market where elite teams who can offer more money can just totally jump you. And yes, you know, that doesn't absolve Newcastle of all blame. There have been mistakes being made, maybe been a bit slow in certain instances. But I don't think Amanda Staveley is the difference here, you know. And for going off road, I mean, Newcastle have won a cup, first cup in 70 years, and qualified for the Champions League. So, you know, things have gone all right on the pitch. What do you make of that question there from Harry, just about kind of the direction? And I guess it goes back to the point you made about, would Newcastle United, or have Newcastle United shown enough this summer already to have the confidence that they would be able to spend that money in the next 3 or 4 weeks?
I think the short answer to that is no. Well, no, look, it's harsh because it's not like Newcastle haven't been proactive. They have. They've just been a little bit unlucky in terms of the targets they've missed out on. But to go back to the Staveley point, I don't subscribe to the masses of messages you see on social media from annoyed fans who say, get Staveley back, or this wouldn't be happening with Staveley. We don't know. Amanda Staveley and Murdo Agusi were brilliant in terms of the sort of personal side of the football club. They were brilliant at sort of selling the dream of Newcastle and the project. They were brilliant at front facing and talking to the fans. They got it. They understood it. I think that's brilliant when you're trying to get deals over the line. But do I look at that and say, well, you know what? Newcastle United would have signed João Pedro over Chelsea if Staveley was there? Probably not, because they can't offer the same money as Chelsea. Would they have been able to sign Hugo Ekitike? Well, no, because they tried to sign Hugo Ekitike when he went to PSG. I don't think that was a big difference. So I don't think you can really boil it down to that simple thing. What I will say, though, is, and this isn't Staveley specific, the club clearly, despite their best efforts and the best efforts of Andy Howe and Steve Nixon, if you're an elite Champions League club who are trying to match Liverpool and Chelsea and Manchester City in the market, you cannot do this without a sporting director. You cannot do this without a technical director. You can't do this without a CEO who is going to be in post for the next couple of years. And Newcastle don't have these things at the minute. So they're going into these battles with one arm time behind their back, and the fact they can't pay the same as Chelsea or Manchester United or Manchester City. So they're going in with both hands behind their back. So there's reasons Newcastle are struggling in this transfer market, and I don't think it's just because of Amanda Staveley isn't there.
And those two things that you mentioned, the lack of a sporting director and the issue with the CEO, out of Newcastle's hands, really. The CEO, maybe they could have looked to have got that over the line in the replacement appointed quicker than they have done. We think that's new in the conclusion. We think the sporting director is also about to be announced as well. But again, you know, let's say it is the chap from Nottingham Forest, and Ross Wilson, he comes in this week or next week. He's coming into the same situation, pretty much, or a worse situation really than Paul Mitchell found himself in. You know, he's got even less time to make a mark in what still needs to be a transformational window. We are running out of time for that to happen. But, you know, Newcastle United have hit speed bumps and blips in this window. There's still enough time to turn it around, and it needs to. Eddie Howe needs those players brought in. Again, you mentioned it's not for the lack of trying, not for the lack of want. Do you think, Aaron, there is maybe an argument to suggest that Newcastle United have been shopping in a market that maybe a realization that they were out of their depth, so to speak, should have happened a little bit sooner, with the likes of Pedro, with the likes of Ekitike, you know, top players that you want to sign? Of course you do, but actually the realization is that we can't match Liverpool's wage. We can't match what Chelsea can offer. So if that's the case with Pedro, then you know, maybe we should just shop the market the next level down, sort of thing.
I don't agree with that, because I think Newcastle are targeting the right players. I think João Pedro and James Trafford and Liam Delap and Hugo Ekitike and Brandon Berman, Matheus Cunha, and all these players that Newcastle have missed out on this summer alone. God, there's a lot of them. I'm probably forgetting some there. I think that is the right caliber of player Newcastle United should be targeting. I mean, they are a Champions League club. These are players that can play in Champions League teams. But then the issue Newcastle United have got is they are going up against Liverpool for Ekitike, and Ekitike is going to want Alexander Isak wages, which Newcastle United cannot pay. You've got João Pedro, who only wants to live in London, or he only wants to go and play at the Club World Cup with Chelsea. Newcastle United cannot offer these things. So I don't think it's the fact that they're shopping in the wrong market. I think they're targeting the right players. I just don't think they're at that level yet. No, and I think they're still a couple of years off that. But I don't think that's a reason why you shouldn't be going for those players. Because, for example, if Liverpool, for example, signed Hugo Ekitike, if Liverpool had signed Alexander Isak last week, and that essentially ruled them out of Ekitike, I think there's probably a good chance Newcastle could sign someone like Ekitike. What I mean is, when they don't have a free run at these players, I think they're going to struggle. And when you're going for these elite players, you're not always going to have a free run at them. So I don't think it's the fact that they're shopping in the wrong market. I think they're just coming up against teams who are further along their journey with them, with more money, more revenue, and maybe bigger projects to sell them.
I love the ambition. I mean, it'd be brilliant to see the likes of Ekitike or the lap up front for Newcastle United, players that can really improve the squad. But maybe for me, it's just a case of a realization of where Newcastle United are frustratingly in the project, because we know what a great place it is to live here. We know the ambitions of the owners. They want to be number one. We love that. And to get that, you need top players. But maybe there's just a realization of that is a couple of years down the line. And I look, going for, say, instead of pursuing someone like Ekitike or Pedro, where the big wages are on offer, and they want to maybe live in London, like you say, or they want to join a club who have a real chance of winning things. Maybe you change your focus and you go for someone like Strand Larson at Wolves, who isn't on the radar of Chelsea and Liverpool, but who can still cut it in the Premier League. He's going to cost you still a reasonable fee, but that's maybe an easier target to get over the line, not the sexy name that everyone wants, but for me, someone who can definitely do a job and will help you to the next level. I don't think it's always got to be about elite players or world-class players. It's about the collective. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think just on that, I think it's interesting this summer we've seen a change in tack from Newcastle, I think, because in the last couple of years they tried to sign Hugo Ekitike from Rennes before he went to PSG. They tried to sign João Pedro from Watford when he went to Brighton, and they tried to sign Benjamin Sesko when he went from Salzburg to Leipzig. Each of those were 3 years ago. And now you've got Newcastle going in for the same player for probably 3 times the price and still missing out. So again, it feels like we talk about it every week in this pod, but do Newcastle need to be actually going back in for the Pedro of 3 years ago and finding the next one like that, or the next Sesko? I don't think at this moment in time they've got the luxury of doing it because of how drastically the squad needs to be improved in the short term.
And the need for Champions League football next season, exactly, and the season after that, and that you haven't necessarily got the time for these players to develop into the Pedro of now. But at the same time, you maybe haven't got the wages or the attraction to get the Pedro of the date. It's a proper minefield, and I don't envy Andy Howe, Steve Nixon of the job they've got, because it's great to see that they can target the right player, they know the right player, and that they also believe Newcastle United can sign these players. And I love that. I love that he's so confident in what the club and the team has to offer. But here we are with just Anthony Elanga over the line, and Newcastle United are short of options, most certainly, and the season's only a matter of weeks away. Back to Isak, I just want to raise the second issue that I've got, and it's his refusal to train. Reports suggest that he went in on that Monday and left quickly after, and people will mention Johan Wissa doing the same thing at Brentford, and I don't like that. I don't like the way he's going about it, but from the perspective of both players, you can see why they do it, because they think it's going to force the selling club's hand. It doesn't always work like that. But you look at Morgan Gibbs-White, Aaron, fancied the move to Spurs, didn't work out. Was it going to happen? Wasn't it going to happen? Still turned up for training, still won pre-season. Okay, he signed a big contract. I just think for Isak not to travel to Glasgow or to Asia, not very professional in my opinion. Yes, there's that injury that's playing away in the background, but look, you get on that plane. I think it just doesn't look good. And I sent you a message on the Sunday after the Celtic game and said, I've been told his representatives aren't very happy, and I think this runs for the worst for Newcastle United. And here we are. I just think Isak should really be thinking, I'll keep myself fit, I'll keep myself as match ready as I can be, whether I'm playing in black and white or red next season, get on the plane. Get on the plane and train with your teammates, because there's a strong chance that you could still be a Newcastle United player come the end of the window. And I just think something like that, does it burn the bridges not only with some of the fans, but also some of the squad members as well, because it just doesn't look professional.
Yeah, look, I think the squad have been very, very diplomatic when asked about it in the last couple of days. Trippier has spoken about it, Dan Burn has spoken about it, Bruno's spoken about it, and I thought they've all handled it well, but surely behind the scenes they are they thinking differently of Alexander Isak now? Because I'll be totally honest, look, I'm not going to, pretend that I'm in that dressing room every day or that I know Alexander Isak's personality inside and out, but I didn't expect this from Isak.
No, I didn't.
I didn't expect him to down tools like this. And as you say, you point out there, Morgan Gibbs-White, who's done it the total opposite way, who really wanted to move to Spurs and has obviously ended up staying at Forest and signed a new deal. I don't know. It's tricky. I think with fans, if Alexander Isak had came on the plane to Singapore in South Korea, which Eddie Howe clearly, I don't think, wanted him to do in the situation, I don't think Isak's bridges would have been burned with Newcastle United supporters. Whereas now, I think the sentiment is only growing on social media that it's time to cash in and that there's no way back. I don't agree with that. I think there is a way back. And I also was saying to someone the other day who sort of tongue-in-cheek said, that's it now. He'll never, be back in my good books. And I said, well, if he scores against Aston Villa, then he will be. It'll be forgotten about. But, I think we're a long way off that stage at the minute.
Oh, most certainly so. And I've asked people on social media to get in touch regarding that question of whether Alexander Isak can do a U-turn or has he burned his bridges. And we've got loads of responses. So thank you very much to everyone that has replied to me. We've got Rob saying, I think either way this week, there needs to be something. Not going on 2 hours of bad luck PR-wise. Our best player not there when we were trying to grow as a club. Ray says he's been smart with his approach. He's left it open for a U-turn if he doesn't get what he wants. I have a feeling things will change in the next week. And if they don't, him or a frustrated Eddie Howe will burn the bridge if nothing unfolds either way. Lauren Rabu says, I think we'd be stupid not to welcome him back, but I can't see him staying now. How would the rest of the team feel? If we're selling, we need to do it as soon as possible, or we still have the time to spend the funds. Carl says he should have dealt with it in a more professional manner. The second Liverpool showed interest, he's just down tools and made it clear he wants to leave. This could have been played out in the background while he joined the lads on tour. Instead, he's made his feelings clear, and that's something I totally agree with. Jeff says if he doesn't go with every passing minute, that seems unlikely. Then what options has he got? Omar says would obviously be welcome back, but probably lost some of the adoration and love that he had. Dominic says, now that he's made it clear he wants to leave, sell him, but only if Liverpool or any other club meets the valuation. If no club meets his valuation, he stays until next summer, when you can likely sell him for a similar fee with 2 years remaining on his deal. And there's loads. I mean, Chris says he's burnt the bridges with me. Tada. Lee says it would be fine for me, similar to Goodbye. Won't be booed, but I also won't celebrate him. It'll be a marriage of convenience as he wants out, and he's told the world that now.
I think there's a good point made there about the adoration. I think if Alexander Isak does stay, I think he has tainted his relationship with Newcastle United fans a bit.
Well, that's why I wanted an ideal word him to knock on the door, post Everton, and go, I'm done. I'm out.
The interesting thing about that is we've just spoken about it from a Newcastle United point of view, but from an Alexander Isak point of view, if he had knocked on the door at the start of the summer and said, look, Eddie, I want to go, put me in the shop window, you suspect Arsenal would have definitely been in for him. Chelsea would probably have went for him instead of Pedro. All these clubs around Europe probably would have made the move for Isak. And yet now, not only are Newcastle left with limited options to replace him, but actually it's probably Liverpool or bust for him. And if Liverpool don't want him, and I can't see him going to Saudi Arabia, then he has backed himself into a corner and he's got to stay.
And that's what I mean about the timing. It's so interesting from his point of view to do this now, because I agree with you. If he does this straight as the season ends, he moves to a top club who will challenge for the Premier League title.
But I think he must, him and his representatives must fully believe that he is going to Liverpool.
Yeah, but
they can't. Surely he is not going to back himself in the corner without knowing that Liverpool is a very, very solid option on the table.
Yeah, but this is the interesting thing, right? Clubs and agents talk. That's just the way of the world, and there's a fine line from it being incorrect and what is allowed and all that. But they do talk. Now, Liverpool must have known this was going to happen. Someone at Liverpool must have known that Alexander Isak was set to refuse to go to Asia. However you want to point it up, he wasn't going to go on tour with Newcastle United. And yet they've gone out and signed Hugo Ekitike. Now, my question is, how do you put in that approach, get told he's not for sale, 4 days later you announce the sign of another striker, and then at the same time, Alexander Isak actually says, wait there, I want to explore my options. Like, that is a total oversight from Liverpool's point of view, in my opinion. I mean, I don't know for certain, but they must have known something was coming down the line.
But they
don't do this.
But they look like they want both, though.
Yeah, well, they're going to sell Diaz to Bayern Munich for 75, 80 million euros.
65 million pound, yeah.
Now, how are they going to find the money? Because Isak,
they have got the money to do it, Liverpool. Now they've spent, I was looking at this last week, they've spent 294 million this summer on new signings. They've sold, before Diaz, I think they'd sold 60 million pounds worth, Kelleher and the defender Kwanzaa. They've raked in a little bit more. But when you look at Liverpool's revenue, they are so far clear of PSR, worries. It's ridiculous. They made some ridiculous, like 170 million pounds last season for winning the Premier League. They had another 80 million on top of that for the Champions League. Brand new 60 million pound a year deal with Adidas. They've got the money. Add in Luis Diaz and Darwin Núñez, who they're going to sell. You've paid for Isak. They are going to do it. If they sign Isak, they will have spent the most in a single transfer window ever, beating Chelsea of 2 years ago by far. They've got the money to do it, and I think.
You think he's going to be a Liverpool player?
I think if you ask me right now, where will he be playing September 1st? I think Liverpool.
No ceiling though at Anfield, remember?
Exactly.
Just on the belief from some that Isak could sign a new contract with a clause that says he can leave next summer. He reportedly wants £300,000 a week, and that's just not going to happen. I genuinely think even Newcastle United could make the numbers work and pay that, they would not pay that, simply because it opens a huge can of worms. If you're Anthony Gordon, Santonari, Joelinton, Bruno, and you see Isak getting a pay rise to £300,000 a week, you will certainly be asking questions. Even at 220, 250, it gets other top players, their heads turned. And I think that then creates another dynamic in the dressing room, which you just do not want. So I don't think there's any chance of him signing a contract on those demands at all. You've got to break the wage structure at some point, Aaron, but it's got to be done in a sensible manner. And that isn't it.
I agree with the can of worm statement. And I think, Newcastle, we know why they want to keep that wage structure so tight. And that's because if Alexander Isak gets a huge pay rise, which that would be, even 250 would be, Bruno and Sandro are going to go knocking on the door and saying, right, well, where's our bonus? Where's our lift? But just to play as devil's advocate and step in Alexander Isak's shoes, for the last 10 days, all anybody has said is how Alexander Isak is worth £150 million and he's going to be the most expensive player in the Premier League. And he must be sitting there, and his agents will be sitting there and thinking, well, we're not getting paid like a £150 million player. We're not getting paid like the most expensive player in Premier League history, not by a long shot. So can you, from the other side, is he not, entitled
to demand that? No, I get that. And I totally get the point of view that you're painting there. But also, the club have to do right by the club. No player is bigger than the club. Now, if he's been promised something down the line, which unfortunately the club are unable to be to deliver, that's the mistake of someone that we've already spoken about potentially. But I get the point you're making about the demands and how much we value him as a player in terms of that price tag. But the club just can't afford to pay. Keith Downey mentioned this actually on his YouTube the other day, and I thought it was really interesting. Alexander Isak has outgrown Newcastle United. That's probably the main point when it comes to Isak and Newcastle United. No one expected him to develop in the way that he has, to be as good as he's become. And Newcastle United, for whatever reasons, whether it's changes in the boardroom, whether it's PSR, have just not been able to keep up with Alexander Isak. So actually, maybe, look, his exit was always going to happen, whether it be this summer or next summer. I didn't think it'd be this summer, but I definitely thought it'd be next summer.
Well, I was getting really annoyed at that statement, because when, God, only 10 days ago, it feels like a lifetime ago, Newcastle United were trying to sign Hugo Ekitike, everybody kept banging on about how Hugo Ekitike was the perfect signing because he was going to come in and play alongside Alexander Isak, and he was going to have a year to bed in, and then he was going to replace Isak. And I thought that is utter nonsense. Why are we talking up the fact Alexander Isak is going to leave the club? Why is it a foregone conclusion that Alexander Isak has to leave? Why can't Newcastle United grow with him? Now, they are lagging behind their rivals in terms of revenue and what they can do in terms of finances and the players they can attract and the journey. But I was never, ever buying into the fact that Alexander Isak had to leave. It's just Newcastle, as you say, are not keeping pace with that player. I think if he goes this summer, it could really, really set Newcastle United back, because I think it will be the first time in a couple of years that Newcastle United have looked like a stepping stone football club, because I think post-takeover they haven't.
It's an interesting point. It really is an interesting point. I think had this happened at the start of the window, I don't think there'd be that viewpoint at all, because I think Newcastle would have been able to go out and get not just one striker in, but two quality strikers in. Now time is against them. I think they will struggle to get more than one striker over the line when really they do need a pair to come through the door. But look, it's timing for me is the issue. I think Alexander Isak for me has burnt his bridges. If he comes back and plays for Newcastle United, then of course we back and we support him. But from my point of view, I think the damage has been done, because even if he bags against Aston Villa, there's still that realization that he wants to be aware that in an ideal world he would be playing that first Monday night at St James Park. He'd be playing for the opposition. That's what he wants. And it doesn't matter if he turns up and scores for Newcastle United. We know where his heart is, and he wants to play for not Liverpool, then a club like, I don't know, Chelsea, Arsenal, someone who can then win a Premier League title. So for me, a want-away striker is a want-away striker. It's just whether Newcastle United have enough turnaround to replace him, and that is the issue. Would you? I am guessing, because a few people in the comments have said this, that it has to be replacement first, then sale.
Easy. You have to wrestle back control of this summer by signing his replacement before he goes. Before you even consider letting him go, you have to have someone through the door. Because I think if you don't, I mean, you're over a barrel. You've got 4 weeks after the transfer window. You need 2 strikers. Clubs are going to absolutely rip your eyes out. Whereas I think Newcastle have a little bit of control with Alexander Isak still at the club.
Is Johan Wissa the replacement, or is Benjamin Sesko the replacement?
Benjamin Sesko is the replacement. I don't think he's on Alexander Isak's level, but I think he can get there. Wissa is at the opposite end of his career. Very, very good player, but I think he's more who they should be replacing Callum Wilson with. But I think if you ask anybody listening now, anybody watching now live, and you offer them Isak goes, but Sesko and Wissa come in, I think a lot of them say undoubtedly.
I'd take that, because then you've still got money in the pot to spend elsewhere.
I think everybody would take that. But the way this summer has panned out for Newcastle United, Alexander Isak is going to go, and it would be Nicholas Jackson and somebody else coming in, and Aaron Ramsdale in net, and that's just the.
We're going to mention Aaron Ramsdale in a moment, but please not Nicholas Jackson. I mean, he's awful. And if he's valued at £100 million, by the way, then Alexander Isak is worth at least 200. Ridiculous. But yeah, Johan Wissa and Benjamin Sesko, I think, would certainly be favourable if Newcastle managed to get £150 million for Alexander Isak. Although my gut tells me Sesko is going to end up at Manchester United.
That would just be the cherry on the cake, wouldn't it? But this is an interesting point, and it was a conversation that I was sort of having over the weekend. If Sesko goes, it's interesting, at the start of the summer, you had this pot of elite strikers who could move. Isak, Gyökeres, Sesko, Ekitike. That was the top branch of players you thought could realistically go. And every single one of them might be about to go, and Newcastle are going to get a stab at none of them potentially if Manchester United get Sesko. Really interested to know, people watching and listening, who do then Newcastle go for?
Well, this is the question.
If Isak goes and Sesko's not there, who is that next player you get? There's talk about Ollie Watkins. For me, he's too old. I would love to see someone like Julian Alvarez from Atletico come back to the Prem, but I think he would be costing you mega money. I'd be really, really interested to know if anybody else had.
Well, Dominic says Nicholas Jackson needs a lot of work, but he could be brilliant. I
also agree with that, by the way, but not for 100 million. But I think Jackson, I mean, look, Jackson hasn't covered himself in glory at Chelsea, but I think there's a player in there that Eddie Howe could unlock.
Mateta is a name being
come
mentioned
on,
a few times
please.
there.
To
Miani.
replace Isak, though, we're talking about someone who has to be ready to go elite, not somebody in the
Go
making.
on
They
then.
have to be.
Give me another name,
Well,
but
there you
Sesko.
go.
There you go.
Julian Alvarez,
Okay.
Atletico Madrid.
But I think you can ask the same question about Wissa. Newcastle United are in this kind of difficult situation where they don't want to pay more than 35, 40 million for Johan Wissa. Brentford don't want to let him go for less than 50 million pounds. He's gone on effective strike and said he's not going to play for Brentford, which I'm not a big fan of, but he's trying to press them into a move. I mean, what happens if Newcastle United and Brentford don't come to agreement and they don't get Wissa, let alone Sesko? We're starting with William Masula potentially.
Darwin Nunes swap deal. Nicholas Jackson through the door.
Could you imagine Newcastle United? Nunes and Jackson. I think I would retire the podcast, ladies and gents. That means probably a lot of you would want them to sign. Yeah, for me, I think it's just time. If you can get 150 million for Alexander Isak, I've seen the memes going around. It's the Coutinho card. That's what we could do. That could give Newcastle United. It might not them back a year, but it could give Newcastle United the ground to really build this squad in the same fashion Liverpool have. And look, top players are always going to leave. We can go back down the years. Players will leave, but if it's handled correctly, it doesn't hurt as much. And again, it's just a shame that this hasn't happened early in the window to give Newcastle United enough time to really turn it around. But I do think he leaves. I do. I think Liverpool will probably get the bid in, and then it's just the art of negotiation. And this is where I'm really keeping everything crossed that if Newcastle are to sell, this is their chance to show that they are no mugs. It's been a big criticism for Newcastle United under this ownership and the previous ownership. They're not very good at selling. If you lose your best player so close to the new season, then you need to extract maximum value. For me, at least 150 million pounds. It's a chance to show yourself in the market as real good negotiators. Newcastle's still in a great position. I know the word is the player do not want to sell, but I cannot see how Isak goes back from this position. So if he's going to go out and get maximum value and more.
Yeah, look, I don't think fans would be happy for anything less than 150 million. I don't think Newcastle would be happy with anything less than 150 million. I think despite the fact that the player is essentially saying, I want to go, and he's essentially putting you on the back foot, I think Newcastle really need to take a stand, especially after what a bruising summer this has been, to actually say, you know what, no, we're not going to be rolled over again. We want to keep the player. You're under contract for 3 years. If we're not getting market value for you, then you're not good. Now, I think it's really interesting what Eddie Howe said over the weekend. On Saturday morning in Singapore, he was asked about Alexander Isak, and he said, there's always big decisions to make when you're at Newcastle. I think that goes with the territory. I'm not actually having daily contact with anyone connected with the board. We're out here. It's been a whirlwind of sensitive training and intensity. And I've read the wrong quote. But then he essentially says, the manager, of course, has an opinion, but ultimately the decision will rest with the board. So it is the ownership who are going to decide whether Alexander stays or goes.
And the word is they don't want to sell, but I wonder whether they're just playing hardball with that. I mean, who do you think's leading these negotiations? Because reports say the Public Investment Fund have put out their stance, non-negotiable. He's not for sale. But again, we mentioned no director of football. So who was actually picking up the phone when Liverpool send that fax through and say 110 million to begin with? Who was picking up the phone to Anfield and saying, get on your horse and you're going to have to at least offer us 30 million more just to have the conversation started?
Look, I think we will see PIF getting involved in this deal because of the high nature of it. I think, as Eddie Howe's alluded to, I think we will see Yasser Al-Rumayyan playing a big part in it. In terms of the general recruitment around the football club at the minute, Andy Howe is obviously assuming a lot more responsibility than he previously has. We've heard he's very much in talks with Brentford daily to try and get a deal for Wissa done. It sounds like Steve Nixon is maybe dealing with more of the European side of any deals that they're trying to do. But wouldn't it be great if Newcastle United had a sporting director when they're trying to potentially sell an £150 million player?
Or someone to take over the negotiations and leave the likes of Andy Howe and Steve Nixon to talent spot, which is what they're really, really good at. But of course, Newcastle United stung by the departure of Paul Mitchell, which came a little bit out of the blue. And we've got a few questions actually on that, and we've covered it briefly, but about the fact that there's a bit of a vacuum there in that kind of board level kind of structure, you think?
Yeah, a little bit. Now, look, it's tricky, isn't it? Because Andy Howe's not a well-known name. A lot of fans are just taking it as, he's Eddie's nephew. I think that's doing him a disservice. He would not be that football club if he wasn't there. but he does not have the experience of a seasoned sporting director like Paul Mitchell, like Ross Wilson. So there is a bit of a vacuum, absolutely, and I think we've seen such a brutal summer for Newcastle, and it definitely hasn't been helped by key positions not being filled behind the scenes.
How do you think Eddie Howe's feeling? Got a few people live on YouTube saying he looks tired. He's got a frustrated figure.
I think I would be tired if I was Eddie Howe.
What do you think's going on in his mind?
Look, I think he's visibly frustrated, and I think while he's trying to put on a brave face as yours does, I think you can tell that the frustration's there. But I think he would be 10 times more frustrated if Newcastle weren't trying to get these players in. I think he understands that they're going for these players and missing out, rather than it be a case of them just not wanting to do business. They are trying, they're trying to be proactive. But absolutely he's not happy. And I think we all thought it couldn't get worse than last summer, when there was all this talk of England and Mitchell and fallout and Marquis. I think I would probably take last summer over this summer as it stands.
Well, on that, Isak, Wissa, we don't want the next few weeks to be focused just on those two in a long drawn-out saga. I'd click my fingers if I could, and it would be all sorted as soon as we come off air, or break it now. We don't want this to drag on. Do we want both of those sagas to be done and dusted as quick as possible?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Especially Alexander Isak. You need to know sooner rather than later whether he's staying or going, because if he is going, you need him to go, and you need him to be replaced. I don't think it benefits Newcastle the longer he stays. On Wissa, obviously you want a deal done. It doesn't sound like it's going to be easy with Brentford, but at least you've got the player there wanting the move for a change. It's not a Pedro or Delap or in Burma where they're obviously favouring another move. At least you've got a player who really wants to make it. But look, we've got a month left for the transfer window. They need to get a move on.
We've got some questions that we'll get on to. We're just going to quickly talk about James Trafford. Deal looked done. People you spoke to said it was pretty much all done. Player wanted to join Newcastle United, but they were stung by this clause in which City were allowed to match whatever bid was put in, and the player effectively had to join Manchester City. What's your take on it? What's your reading on it?
Yeah, another frustrating one, given how long Newcastle United have pursued him. Very frustrating that it turns out they probably could have signed him about a month ago before the Club World Cup. But, chose not to, chose to play hardball. They tried to get a deal done for around 27 million. Obviously, this clause that Manchester City had in the 2023 deal to send him to Burnley allowed them sort of a clause that would allow them to match any price put in. They've done that. Trafford's chosen to move for the Etihad. Again, it's just, it doesn't put Newcastle United in the best light. Again, sort of reaffirms this belief that they can't get deals over the line. They're haggling. They're slow to move. So yeah, frustrating. I don't think James Trafford or more widely the goalkeeping department is a priority, but I think for forward planning it would have been a very good signing, because I think you've then signed a goalkeeper who can probably see out the next 6, 7, 8 years of his career at Newcastle.
I'd feel much more comfortable agreeing with you on that if Nick Pope hadn't had. He hasn't had the best of pre-seasons, has he?
He hasn't, but look, I think when push comes to shove, I think Nick Pope still can be Newcastle United's number one.
I mean, if the options are Nick Pope, Aaron Ramsdale, I'm going Nick Pope.
Well, I think if the option is you can sign James Trafford, but you lose Alexander Isak and you don't sign a striker, then where's the priority lie at the minute for Newcastle? It's not at the back for me. It's not in between the sticks. They've got to be focused on the top end of the pitch, and I just don't think this summer, with what they need to do, the goalkeeper is high on my priority list. I would not, for the record, obviously be signing Aaron Ramsdale. I don't think he's
reports suggest Newcastle are in talks for him. We know there's been a long-standing interest in him from Eddie Howe, worked with him at Bournemouth. It's broken this afternoon that Newcastle United are now pursuing him after the collapse of the Trafford deal. I have to say, he's not an upgrade on Nick Pope. He's really, really not. He's full of errors. And we know that Newcastle want a goalkeeper who can play with the ball at his feet, but I don't want that at the expense of a brilliant shot stopper. And Nick Pope is a better shot stopper than Aaron Ramsdale. He's for me arguably the best shot stopper in the Premier League. That is one of those deals alongside of Newcastle for whatever reason brought in Nunes or Jackson, and I just couldn't understand. I'd back them, you back them, whatever, but I'd certainly have a few questions about it.
Well, I think you're probably not alone, because this broke an hour ago when we were coming on air. And I must say, having had a very brief flick through social media, I didn't think the Nicholas Jackson speculation could garner a worse interest, but somehow it has, and that's with Aaron Ramsdale. We've got a piece online on our website at the minute. Our information is that there's definitely interest in Aaron Ramsdale. Eddie Howe's been a long-term fan of his. Obviously, it worked together at Bournemouth, but a price would need to be thrashed out. Potentially, a loan deal with an option to buy. Yeah, I don't think I can get on board with this.
Let us know in the comments if you're watching live or later on social media whether you'd welcome Aaron Ramsdale to Newcastle. Now, I've got a lot of people in the comment section. You can't trust Pope, says one watcher here. Dennis says Pope is not very good. A lot of people questioning whether Pope could be Newcastle United number one in the new season. Darren says, what happened to the French keepers that we were looking at?
Well, reports in France over the weekend actually for another blow for Newcastle. There's been a lot of reporting that Newcastle were interested in Lucas Chevalier from Lille as a potential backup to James Trafford. It looks like he has now agreed personal terms with PSG. So that's another one that looks like it's buried.
I just want the transfer window to end, please. On to some questions. And go on.
I've got a question for you, just as you said that, because somebody asked me over the weekend or on Friday, and I'll put it to you. If you could close the transfer window right now, and Newcastle United's squad stays the same, would you do it?
I mean, you keep Isak, but you keep an unhappy Isak. No, I think you need too many players.
So you want to do another month of this?
Yeah. Begrudgingly.
Targets, miss out on targets.
If Isak goes, they need two
him.
strikers.
Yeah.
The argument need another centre midfielder. They need that right side centre back.
Need a goalkeeper, potentially. Some people say that's 5.
But what I will say,
one a week.
What I will say, and again, I'm so frustrated that this whole Isak saga didn't play out earlier. Newcastle United qualified for the Champions League in those last 10, 11 games without Alexander Isak effectively. He scored that goal against Brighton from the spot. Really important point, but he was largely absent for the final bit of the season. Some people would argue absent since the cup final. For whatever reason, maybe there's a little bit of an injury, maybe his head was turned. Whatever the reason, Newcastle United for me showed there's that spine of a squad there. So losing Alexander Isak would sting, but they've got the core there. Gordon, Bruno, Tonali, Joe Linton. If they can replace Alexander Isak with someone who can score goals in the Premier League, Wissa, for example, can do it. He's not Alexander Isak quality, but it doesn't matter because we know he can do it in the Premier League. Okay, you might only get 2 years out of him, but what does it matter if he scores 40 goals in that time? Do you know what I mean? It's not the end of the world if Alexander Isak leaves. Big players will leave. Newcastle United have shown they've got the squad to do it without him.
Yeah, look, I think, while as I've said, I think the Isak deal will maybe raise questions about Newcastle being that stepping stone, what part of the journey they're at. I think if Newcastle United can get 150 million from him, I think for an unhappy player, I think you probably take it because you know you can reinvest it. We probably won't have to hear the letters PSR for in a good couple of years because Newcastle's finances will obviously have improved. Again, it's the buzzword of this episode. It's the timing of it. Do they have enough time to replace him? And that's what we're all concerned about.
And Darren says the squad depth is weaker if we close the window. Ramsdale's a good goalkeeper. And if we sign Nicholas Jackson, I will get behind him, says 80s Gamer. Tell says, I don't see Zach. You turning the club have scored an own goal here. A new contract should have been done. World-class striker lost. What do you make of that? I mean, the question of the show today was, will Alexander Isak or can Alexander Isak do a U-turn at Newcastle United? So, Aaron, can Alexander Isak do a U-turn?
Yes.
Yes?
100%.
Chances of it being a U-turn, a new contract signed?
I think there's probably more chance of it happening than people believe because, as we've said, of the limited options available to Isak, i.e., if Liverpool think they can't make the move or won't make the move, then I think he probably has to stay. And I wouldn't be totally surprised if Eddie Howe and his representatives in Isak sit around the table and say, look, one more year and we will sell you next summer, 100 million, 110 million.
I want to get that down on paper though, because Johan Wissa, I believe that was the case. This is
what I mean. So I don't think I wouldn't be totally surprised if it doesn't happen. But I just think, as I said to you earlier, I think Isak and his reps must know there's a very, very good chance for it happening. Or I think he would be on the plane. I think it would be business as usual in public. So yeah, look,
I think
who
it can
knows?
happen, but the only way it'll happen, a new contract with that clause in, is if he lowers his demands. There's no way Newcastle United are paying more than 200 to 210 at a push on a new deal for him. It's just not going to happen. So, right, questions to finish off. And Alfie's emailed in and writes, it's been a really frustrating summer so far. And now with Isak set to go, what do you think the mood is like within the camp?
The mood in the camp actually surprisingly looks pretty upbeat again, without actually being there on the plane between Singapore and South Korea at the minute. It's hard to know, but certainly the noises come out the club is that it hasn't upset the apple cart too much. I want to say that I had some how quotes on that very thing, but I think I've got rid of them. But yeah, look, I think there will probably be very much questions internally of them saying we probably didn't expect this, but I don't think it looks like it's derailed the camp, and I think they still look very, very focused heading into the new season.
Yeah, I think players obviously have a better perspective of this. Is just football. I think sometimes as fans and journalists, maybe we can get too emotionally attached to the saga, and of course, we are guilty of maybe adding to that because the nature of the job. But players will have been in dressing rooms where players go, their friends go. It's just the nature of it, and I don't think they'll be immune to it. Yes, they'll be frustrated because the top player wants to leave, but at the same time, I don't think there'll be any tears or what have you. It's just the way of the game, right?
Well, Eddie Howe yesterday after that Arsenal game, when asked about it, told reporters that it was business as usual. He said, "You don't get a chance when you come on these tours to think about anything else other than training and the next game. The level is so high, even in these games, we have to be well prepared. We have to try and be at our best. So naturally, even though I think they're going to miss a player of Alex's quality in the group, they're going to feel that. There's no denying it. I can't sit here and say the players won't be affected, but they're very professional and they're doing brilliantly as far as I can see in terms of managing the situation."
Which is good to hear. Anthony says, get Isak out, obviously, and get 4 players in. Sam says, yes, Isak can make a return, but he won't. I feel the club have let Eddie down badly and the fans down as well in terms of developing the project from stadium, training facilities, brand, structure and players. Sam is not happy at all with the current direction of the club. Peter has written in and says, do you think there's a risk Newcastle become totally embedded in this Isak saga and are unable to act when it comes to arrivals? They still need a centre-back and a central midfielder plus his replacement.
Look, I certainly don't think it will help their cause because you've added another really difficult puzzle to solve if Isak goes. And as we've mentioned a lot in this pod, they already need probably 4 players in different positions to come in anyway before he's even left the club. So, look, I don't think it's impossible that they get all these deals done, but it certainly adds a really, really complicated layer to these negotiations with other clubs.
Certainly so. Don says he's always said he loves playing for Newcastle United. Just pay him. If you want a challenge for things, if you want to be a serious club, you play your players what they deserve.
Yeah, look, in an ideal world, you would pay Alexander Isak exactly what he wants, but we know Newcastle United just don't have the revenue to do it. They don't have the revenue streams in place to be able to match these other clubs and what they can earn. As we touched on earlier in the show, they don't want to break that wage structure, and not only break it, they would shatter it if they give Isak what he's reportedly after. So, Newcastle have to be sensible. And if it's either breaking their wage structure or getting £150 million for a player who doesn't want to be there, by the way, by the sounds of it, then I think they're smart to maybe not give them those demands.
Well, there we go. The reason I'm not too fussed about this, and the reason I know that is because I'm not sitting here thinking we should sign the show off by persuading Alexander Isak to stay. If a player doesn't want to play for Newcastle United, doesn't want to stay on this journey, and Kate's been a bit slower than we've maybe expected or hoped for, but there's been various things out of Newcastle's control for that, then they can go. No player is bigger than the club. This is still a club on an upward trajectory who will be at the right end of the Premier League table in the Champions League, hopefully season in, season out. It may take a few years to really get established, but we've got the foundations there that the club have done in the last few years. We've got the core. This club is an exciting project. If you don't want to be here, on you go. Enjoy the rest of your career. Thank you for helping us win the Carabao Cup. But look, this is Newcastle United and no player is bigger than the club.
Well, I think we should sign off on that because there's a quote from Eddie Howe who last week, when talking about transfers coming into the club and talking about the frustration that they've missed out on so many targets, he said, in order for a transfer to really work, in my opinion, the player has to be absolutely desperate to come to your club. And if we don't get that, the transfer doesn't work. We are seeking players that are good enough, but also desperate to come and make the difference. And that could probably work the other way around.
Well, fingers crossed. By this time next week, the Monday show, Aaron won't be here because he's off to see Oasis. So I'm going to try and get a special guest on. At least you'll have one new signing, right, ladies and gents? Hopefully a few more for Newcastle United. But hopefully there will be some positive news over the next few days. I mean, Aaron will do our best to bring it to you both online and on the podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in. Pleasure to be back in front of you. Keep yourself safe out there. I mean, Aaron will speak to you guys very soon.